Hey, folks, welcome back to the Utah County Republican Party podcast, official podcast. We're official, aren't we?
Yeah.
All right.
We're rolling.
We're here with Cole Kelley. Cole, you're running for state school board. Which seat?
District 12.
District 12. Yeah, I can never remember. They all cover just weird areas.
It covers, there's 2 precincts in Pleasant Grove. All of Lindon, all of Vineyard, all of Orem. And it goes out to Wasatch County, Duschene County, Uintah County, and Daggett County.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Putting some miles on the car, huh?
Yeah, we went to Vernal on Friday night and Roosevelt on Saturday night, and we stayed in Roosevelt on Friday, and it's, I got to tell you, that's those people out there, they've got it figured out.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they know how to vote.
Yeah.
So
my wife grew up in rural Utah, not in any of those areas, but my father-in-law still lives out there. And yeah, you go down there and you talk to them about some of the issues we see up here, and they're just like, yeah, that's why we live here.
Right.
So
right.
Really simple to them.
Yep, absolutely. So there are a lot of things to kind of get into with the state school board, and I'm sure that there are some questions you get asked all the time, but I think where I want to start and where I want to really dive in, and I'll set the stage a little bit right. So I've got 5 kids. My oldest just graduated from high school. And if I'm being perfectly honest, sometimes I wonder if they gave them all the right tools, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And then I've got an 8-year-old, my youngest, so she's in 3rd grade. And so in another 10 years, right, I've been talking to people and I'm like, well, I'm in it for at least another 10 years, right? Because, that's, but then she goes to college, that's a whole nother can of worms. But I wonder, as we get into this and we start moving kids through the system, I mean, it seems like some of my kids, they kind of figure some of this out on their own, but some of the kids that I see coming out and some of the teachers I talk to are concerned about this too. Are the kids getting what they need from school?
That's a good question. Christy, I don't know when you got your degree in education. I was 94 to 97, 93 to 97 about, is when I got my English education degree. Okay. Mm-hmm. And one of the thing that's funny in education, it's almost like there's these ideas and they kind of cycle through. It's oftentimes the same idea with a different dress on Mary,
Mm-hmm.
And we get some professor from Stanford that needs to make his money, and so he changes the dress on Mary just a little bit, but it's really the same idea. But one of the things when I went to school that was really quite popular, and I actually thought it was meaningful, was there's different ways kids learn, mm-hmm. right? And recognizing that there's different ways that kids learn is important, because if we can tap into those different learning styles, we can reach more kids and help them to find their niche in education, right? I feel like right now what we've done is we've narrowed education to the point where it appeals to 1 or 2 learning styles, mm-hmm. right? And you mentioned your 5 kids. I got 5 of my own, and I've got a couple that do really well in school. Mm-hmm. I've got a couple that struggle with school, and they struggle not because they're intelligent, right? Not intelligent. They don't struggle. They struggle because their learning style is different, mm-hmm. right? My son, my 3rd child, he's my oldest boy. He struggled through school, but just to give you an idea of his level of intelligence, this is a kid that before he left on an LDS mission, he rebuilt 6 different motorcycles engines. He would buy them. Somebody would put it on, Facebook Marketplace with a blown engine. He'd buy it for a couple $100, rebuild the engine and sell it. And mm-hmm. he did that with 6 different, and who taught him how to rebuild an engine? Himself. YouTube. Yeah. Cause I didn't. I have no idea what's going on in there. Right. Yeah. And you're right. It was a lot of YouTube and just kind of figuring it out. Right. And so, we've got to, get back to recognizing that there's more than just one way for kids to learn, and make sure that we're providing a quality education for all kids.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I can just echo some of this because, like I said, my oldest son, he kind of struggled with high school. And a lot of it, he basically was just saying, yeah, the school was just made hard. Right. And yeah, I wonder if his learning style had been catered to a little bit more, or if somebody had just taken an extra minute to figure out, oh, okay, this is how this kid's brain works. And so if I accommodate him in this way, maybe not change the whole way they do things with him, right? If that would have made a difference.
And I also don't think that it's a coincidence that in your case and in my case, it's our sons, right?
Right.
My daughters killed it. All three of them killed it in education.
Yeah, that's actually my experience too.
Yeah,
my son. Yeah, he's probably, if you're looking just on like potential or IQ, he's probably my smartest child. Struggled the most.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, and that's what we've got to start recognizing. We've got to start recognizing that that kids learn in different ways. Let's create opportunities for them to learn in the way that they're going to excel.
Right. So I feel like you've kind of put your finger on a problem, and we've all validated that, right? It's like, hey, look, we all have kids that have kind of gone through this a little bit. What do you do? I mean, what do you change in the system then to make it work for these kids?
Well, I know before we went on there, Christy and I were kind of talking a little bit about assessments, right? In terms of how do we assess students. And right now we assess them one way, right? I mean, is there a place for the ACT test? Sure.
Yeah.
Is there a place for these standardized tests that kids are taking that kind of give them a score to help us know where they're at academically? Sure, there's a place for that. But those tests shouldn't define a student,
right?
It shouldn't be the sole factor that we're using to consider student success and where they can be and where they should end up. And so we've got to be more realistic about finding various ways to assess students and try to help them progress in their own way.
Right. Do you have something specific in mind, or just maybe some guidelines for what that looks like?
There's a couple states. One of the things that I'm trying to focus on in my campaign is really student success. I think that in our school system right now, we are pushing kids through the system with very little emphasis on what did they learn as they move through the system.
Right.
Right. And two states that I think are doing a good job of that really are Florida and Colorado. And what they're doing in those two states is they're saying, let's create a baseline, because we can't compare the kid that's in my class that is English improficient, that's struggling with his English,
right,
to the AP kid,
right,
the kid that's trying to, but both of them should be making progress in the system,
right,
and so a lot of times the AP kid doesn't get challenged, and we've got the student struggling to speak English that's getting lost,
right,
and so we've got to find a way to create a baseline. Say here's where the student's at when they come into our school, and what kind of progress do they make as they move through the system. And and I mentioned there's models out there that do that, and so looking at those, the beautiful thing about the United States of America is there should be, and this is part of what I think has happened, the downfall of really Common Core and what Obama brought in is there should be 50 different experiments taking place throughout the country, and we look at what are other states doing to solve this problem, and let's adapt, and let's find ways that we can do a better job.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too, you bring up the idea of having a baseline and then evaluating where kids are progressing from and where they're progressing to. And we do this in like everything else, right? I mean, if you go to your doctor, you and I are men of at least a certain age, right? And so,
sure.
So they do certain baseline tests.
I'm a little younger than you, Chuck.
That's right, and better looking. But they do a certain level of baseline tests, right? And so then if if you have a concern, then they can come in, they compare it to the baseline, right? And so they can say, okay, this is better, this is worse. I mean, I'm diabetic, so they do this to me every 3 months.
Sure.
But, we do it in business. We do it in, all of these other places, right? It's like, where were we at this point and where are we now? And is it getting better? And, it seems like, then we just force all the kids into this one size fits all program. And,
I think this is a big problem. So I had an interesting perspective. I'm a teacher also, taking a year and a half off.
I'm outnumbered.
Yeah. And I was a PLC coach. So I have an elementary ed license.
Can you say PLC? What?
Professional Learning Community.
Okay.
So
So the education, we do that a lot, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of TLAs,
so many acronyms.
3-letter acronyms.
Yeah, no, thank you. If I say any more,
I'll call
me out. Anyway, so I have an elementary ed license, I have a special ed license, and I have an English endorsement. And so have taught elementary, done special ed a lot, and English, and then found myself at high school. Love high school. That's kind of my jam. I think you agree.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So there was an interesting thing that I started to see as a PLC coach in regard to a standard and holding a standard, because from the perspective of PLC coach, what I was able to do was have all the teams come in. So every department comes in twice a year, and they hold a meeting, and they're looking at, what they're doing, common things that they're doing. And I started to see that the tests that were still holding a standard that was objective and not subjective, which meant that they could, collectively come together in a collaborative way to come up with some standards, was the AP test and the ACT.
Right.
And particularly the AP tests still are holding a standard relatively high. Calculus is one of those. And so it's not moving, the standard's staying the same, and you're having teachers, along with their students, reaching for that, because the teachers are also competing, if they're doing a good job, competing against their previous scores.
Yeah.
Right. And so they've got, some sort of a benchmark where they've been keeping tallies of where they're at, and they usually know the percentage of passing rate. And anyway, I really started to see that when you have nothing to tether yourself to, you can turn, and if you have standards that can be interpreted subjectively, which Common Core, that's what has happened with Common Core. To find a really great teacher, especially in those areas, usually meant that they had some sort of a standard. And I don't know how you feel, but I would love to ask you, what are your thoughts on, and this is going, blast from the past, but getting rid of textbooks?
That is a blast from the past. Yeah. Here's what I can tell you in my subject, right? Yeah. And I taught English for 10 years. Okay. First 10 years of my career, I was an English education major, but I got, when I was in college, I got licensed as a financial planner. And so I've got a background in finance, worked part-time with ING Financial Partners for a number of years. And when the state of Utah started to require financial literacy for graduation, that's when that's what I want to teach. I've taught financial literacy for the past 17 years. I love it. It's really been, I've always loved teaching, but the fit of that subject together with teaching, I love what I do. I don't use a textbook. We've never had a textbook for financial literacy.
That's true. It came after.
Okay. There's Dave Ramsey stuff that you can pull off, and you can pull off a lot of different things. But part of, and this is one of the things that people, I at the 10-year anniversary of financial literacy, Karsten Walker, who taught at Mountain View, I know you know Karsten well, and myself worked with John Dougal at the state auditor's office, and we actually conducted some research and did an audit report with Auditor Dougal on how is financial literacy doing, right? And then the number one factor, and this is what people got to recognize, the number one factor that we found in what's making a difference in financial literacy is an expert in the classroom.
Yeah.
And I would consider myself to be an expert in the classroom when it comes to financial literacy. And so when it comes to that topic, and you can look at, we have we're like a CTE class, and CTE is one of those classes that they do have
another TLA.
Yeah, sorry, it's career technical education, right? But the CTE classes, they have a test, an end of level test where you're creating somewhat of a benchmark and saying, okay, here's how this teacher's doing. And financial literacy is not technically a CTE class, but we do have, we've been treated like a CTE class, and we've got that end of level test. So we can compare all financial literacy teachers across the state and look. Right. And there was one school, as we were researching, there was one school, and my big push is to get principals to take the subject seriously, right? But there was one school where they were using it to fill teachers' schedules, and giving one teacher one course of, financial lit here so they could have a full schedule. And they had 12 different teachers teaching one course of financial literacy, okay? The scores from that school were horrendous, right? And I get frustrated because I get passionate about the subject. I think it's important for kids. But part of what we struggle with in Utah, and I'm getting to the textbook question because it's a great question, but part of what we struggle with in Utah is who drives textbooks. Sure. And it's the big states. It's California. Yes. Yeah. It's True. New York. Yeah. Because if
they're the big markets.
Yeah, they're the big markets. And so if we want to pursue the ideology that California is pursuing, that New York is pursuing, then those textbooks are what we have available to us. We've got to make sure that teachers that are coming into the classroom are experts in their subject, and they don't need a textbook to teach their subject.
Okay, so what's the new version of the textbook often comes in the form of a program or some form of tech that they want you to use.
I love tech.
And I have seen ideology, in those programs. And so...
Well, there's ideology in the textbook. There's ideology in the program. Sure. Yeah.
And I think, I'm torn on it. I don't know how you guys were, but I was a chatty kid in school. And so I would talk a little too much in class, but I cared about my grades. So then I would get home and be like, oh no, what was the lesson? And I'd go and I would open the textbook and I'd go to the front of the chapter and there would be an example and I'd figure it out and get my homework done. But when you go home and you don't have whatever the teacher used, or you got to look it up, too many clicks, whatever.
Right.
I don't see the accessibility the same as it had been in the past. I'm not saying go back, but I do think that there should be an acknowledgement of something lost that maybe we don't have for kids to have, a hard copy right in front of them to take a look at. But I do see programs becoming the professional, the expert, the content expert, and I'm super concerned about that. So I saw it in English where ACT scores. I was at a school where a teacher that I worked with, there were two of us that really wanted to make sure that everything that was on the ACT would be covered. So we backed it up and we were like, okay, sophomores teach this, junior teachers teach this. And so we have all this stuff that's coming in, grammar, punctuation, conventions that they're going to get to. And I noticed a lot of newer teachers being resistant to teaching the old conventions. But I was grateful that the ACT was still holding that standard because we were at a school where parents cared. Sure. They want that ACT, in language arts to be higher. So, so those were the two things, the AP test and the ACT, and I got thinking about this subject too, because education is near and dear to my heart. And I thought, what could be a possible solution? And maybe it's localizing those standard tests. Maybe it is having either a district or a board of parents who are experts in that same field too, and getting it out of the hands of any organizations that do have a bias or, a political ideology that they're pushing or a financial incentive that they're looking for. And I don't know, those are just things that as I've lived in it, I've looked at it and stepped back and said, hey, maybe this could solve that problem. But I agree, a standard needs to exist.
Measurement is important, right? And I'm a coach too, right? And so I like to use the sports analogy. We as a coach, we have to put our product out for people to judge on a pretty
Right.
frequent basis.
Yeah.
Okay?
And up against other people.
Correct.
in a lot of
And well,
cases.
and that's just it, right? There's a score that
Yeah.
determines the winner,
Yep.
if you will.
Yep.
Okay. And so we're being measured. Okay. We're being, and you want to talk about why parents get upset. I mean, I know you've got, your husband's a principal, and, he probably has just as many complaints about sports as he does academics,
Yeah.
probably more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a
And
hot issue.
Yeah, and it's because the product's being put out there for people to see. In education, a lot of times we don't know what the score is. We don't know what the measurement is, right? I put a post on Facebook once, right? And I basically said, all right, here's the graduating class of 2024. And here's the proficiency rates of that graduating class of 2024.
Right.
Oh yeah. You ain't kidding.
I know where that number is.
That the firestorm of,
I'm sure,
of people that were like, "Are you kidding me?" Right?
Yeah.
And the proficiency of our graduates is very low.
Yeah.
Right? But not many people really know that those proficiency rates exist, right? And what proficiency is. And we could argue all day about those proficiency standards and what we're measuring. But
Sure.
but that's, I mean, the CTE courses that I was talking about, right? Who creates those CTE tests? Who created the financial literacy test? It was teachers.
Yep.
It was the teachers, the financial literacy teachers, because financial literacy really is quite unique to Utah.
Right.
And so that it was the teachers that came together, and I was a part of the process, and we had industry professionals that were a part of that. John Dougal himself, our state auditor, was a part of that. And he's a finance guy, right? And so there were a lot of minds coming to the table saying, this is what's important. This is what we need to measure here.
Yeah.
I like our financial literacy end of level test. I think it measures the correct thing. I sometimes will be a little bit baffled. I'll have a student that I'm like, that kid knows it. He did horrible on the test. He's not a test taker.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And I could show you that this student gets it,
Mm-hmm.
but they just didn't test well.
Yeah.
And so it's not always, but most of the time I can predict how a student's going to do on that test.
Yeah.
You know,
Plus it gives a teacher something to, when you're planning out your lesson plans, it gives you structure to what you're going to be teaching.
Sure.
You got to hit all those things.
Yeah.
And there are so many teachers doing great things out there, but there is a frustration with parents. And what do you think are some of those things that you talked about, being a coach, right? And having a standard, some of those things that could potentially be put into a system that would produce a better outcome. So system-wise, of course, we have individuals and we have outliers, but something that maybe is missing in the system that we could add to it.
So generally speaking, the teaching industry, the teaching profession is resistant to the idea of being judged, if you will.
Sure.
Okay, for lack of a better term, in terms of putting their scores out there,
Right.
And comparing.
Right.
And a lot of people are concerned. Oh no, well, that's why they need to be put out there. It really is, because if you're not getting the job done,
Right.
you've either got to make some adjustments,
Yep.
or you've got to find a different job.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you why I actually think there is a positive in the PLC process, which has been criticized in the past by certain groups. But I became converted to the PLC process as a coach in an elementary because I saw it done right. And so when I see it done wrong, I often see some of these things missing. And this is how it went. It was done really well with a 4th grade math class with 3 different teachers. So we would all teach the same thing. And then the next day we would divide our scores up and we would break the kids. At the end of the lesson, they would have a 5-question little quiz. And then we would grade the quizzes and we'd break them into low, medium, and high. And then we would see out of all of ours, which teacher taught it best. And then and you can do this in elementary, you can't do this in other, because they don't teach it at the same time, but we were teaching math at exactly the same time. So we would combine our classes, and the teacher who had the highest scores would teach the kids that were in the lowest category. And so you're right. And we would meet together really quickly, and we would say to the teacher who got the highest scores, show us how you taught it. and they would show how they taught it. And oftentimes, you know, oh my gosh, you did a rhyme, or you did a gimmick, or you did a thing, and it stuck with the kids, right? So then we would switch the groups so that we all retaught the ones, and then we would test them again, and then we would look at the scores. And every single time, I mean, it's just true to human nature. The majority of us don't learn on the first go round, right? But the thing is that overcoming this aversion to releasing scores is we went so quick, we didn't have the chance to worry if we were in the low category. We just had to get it done, because when we had our collaboration, at this time it was Monday, the principal, we'd all meet together in the media center, and the principal would say, before we wrapped up, okay, so whoever your team lead is needs to email me your scores before you guys can go home. I don't know if we ever looked at them. It didn't matter. It was the fact that we had to send our scores to him. We had competition. We had an example. And oftentimes what was left would be a couple of SPED kids. And then I would go down to the special education teacher and say, hey, we're working on this concept. Will you reinforce it again? So then that student has seen it 3 times, right? That's when I saw it. And I went, having a standard, having the competition, releasing the scores, having teachers teach teachers. But oftentimes I'll see some of those not come into play. And really having that principal say, email me those before you leave, was awesome. Like it was the thing that made us have to send the scores in. So I agree. I don't know how we put it into, you know, a higher, but I did see AP Craig Smith down at Lone Peak has had some of the highest calculus scores. He's an expert. He was an engineer, came out of being an engineer and wanted to teach school, and has an incredible system and holds himself to a super high standard of what his percentage, you know, his passing rate was the year before. Right. So I agree. I think the standard piece and letting kids know where they are at, letting teachers know where they're at. It has to be better than these. Some of the testing I saw was not sticking to that.
Let me challenge one thing you said, and then
Sure.
I want to confirm. Here's one of the things that I think is really important. Okay, teaching is an art, right, and part of like the collaboration process, if it's happening naturally, I think it's a great thing.
Sure.
When it's being forced, I
Yes.
think it's not.
Yeah.
I think it's a poor way to do it. And natural collaboration is when you come together, and it sounds like it was happening naturally with your team, right? And that's taking place. But you know, there's 2 of us that teach financial literacy at American Fork High School. We dialogue frequently,
all the time,
right? We dialogue frequently on how are you doing this? How are you doing that? But we're different.
Right.
And so in terms of the way that I teach it, in terms of the way that he teaches it, it's different. But we bounce ideas, we bounce ideas off of us all the time. And in terms of scope and sequence, we're similar. We're not 100% the same, but we're similar, right? And so those things are happening throughout the year. But I think we have to be careful about taking the art out of teaching, right? I use the analogy of if we if you have 300 football teams in the state of Utah and they're all running the same offense, it's boring.
Yeah.
It's not fun, you know?
Yeah.
And part of it is this coach runs this offense because that's his strength. And this coach over here runs this offense because that, and so we've got to recognize that collaboration doesn't mean we all teach the same way. Right. Because teaching is an art, and your personality type, you've got to bring your strengths to the table as a teacher. Right. And so that's sometimes what I think is getting lost in this collaboration is the art of teaching.
I actually agree with you.
You know,
I agree with you.
But the part that I think is good is, and I'm continually going back to these sports analogies because they work, right? But what you were doing when I put my athletes out to compete, I see the errors, and then we go back in and we say, we got to correct this.
Right.
As a team, we struggled with this. And then we put them back out to compete, and we see new things. And we come back and we say, we've got to fix this.
I know exactly.
We got to improve this, about. Right? And that's what you were doing in the classroom. And that has to happen in the classroom is you've got to look at it, see, oh, this is where I'm weak. This is where I'm strong. This is what we got to improve on. This is what these kids were struggling with this, and these kids were struggling that. That's where learning happens. And a big part of what you mentioned too is, do you want to know how we learn in sports? Repetition. Like we do it over.
It's not just sports.
Yeah, right. But how do we learn in the classroom?
Teach it once and you need to be master of it.
Repetition, right?
Yeah.
And so part of what
that's why you have homework that you take home and do 18 math problems before you come back the next day.
Part of what's happening in education, we're getting so broad, that we do just cover it one time and then it's done and we move on, right? And it's like we're not building necessarily on the next concept. And so I took over for a coach who the kids knew 100 moves and knew none of them well. And I came in, I'm like, we're going to know like 2 or 3 from the different positions, and we're going to be really good at those 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Right. And we had a ton of success. Right. And so you could teach kids 100 things and they remember none of it.
Yep.
Or you can narrow that focus. And that's where, the standards with the State Board of Education are important, is really nailing down what are the standards, what are the essential concepts that we want kids to know.
Yeah.
And reading, writing, and arithmetic, we need to narrow that focus.
And we don't need to overdo it. We
Correct.
tend to overdo so many things.
Correct.
Right?
So I guess this kind of comes back to the initial question that I was asking, right? Because we're talking about, systems for improving with the kids and systems for improving with the teachers, and then allowing the teachers to work in ways that benefit the kids. But at the end of the day, I mean, what I'm looking at, you talked about this, our product is going out into the world after they graduate, Sure. So how do you start? And you've talked about some standards, but how do you set the standards? How do you set it and say, okay, this is kind of the baseline for what these kids need to have in order to get out there? And then the other question I have related to that is, it seems like the school districts have a lot of leeway in what they set for the curriculum, right? As long as they fall within the standards set by the state. And so what can you do as a member of the state school board to set the standards, but also then to help the districts do what they need to do in order to deliver this outcome, right?
This sounds like a Common Core question.
It is.
But at the
that's
end
where
of the day,
I'm going.
That's where
I'm dreaming about my 8-year-old being 18 and going out into the world, right? You got 10 years to get her where she needs to be. I mean, how do you do that? How do you set that standard, and how do you help the school districts deliver it?
What Christy is saying, this is a Common Core question, and I'm gonna describe the background of Common Core, okay? Because basically what happened with the Obama administration is the Obama administration came in and said, hey, we want all 50 states learning the exact same thing at the exact same time, and we want to create a Common Core, right? And this is what we
sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, this is what we think that you should do, and it always sounds great, right?
Yeah, they're good at selling this.
Yeah. And here in Utah, you hear this. Oh, we didn't adopt Common Core in Utah.
I know. I hear that every time it comes up.
Well, our state,
we have Utah Core.
Our current state superintendent was very integral in putting together Common Core.
Yeah.
And then we say, oh, we have Utah Core. Well. Hold them up next to each other, all right, and notice the differences, and it's very the differences are minimal.
Okay, so can I ask a pointed question?
Sure, yeah.
What's the problem with Common Core?
Well, it's the broadness of it, right, and the subjectivity of it, right. We're not. It's hard to keep a score with when you draw a painting, okay, and then Chuck draws a painting.
Yeah.
It's subjective, right? You might think you like this one, and he might think you like this one, and so it's hard to how do you measure that, right? And
Chuck
so
did it, so it's just better.
Yeah, right. I mean, and so a lot of those standards are very, very subjective.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, when you say subjective, what you mean is there isn't like a clear, this is correct, this is not correct, right?
Yeah, right.
Whereas with math, it's you either got the right answer or you didn't. You either followed the process or you didn't.
Yeah. So to get directly to your question, right, is okay, how do we fix? Well, I'm not a math guy. Okay. I'm a financial literacy guy. I do know English. I was an English major, taught English for 10 years. But
I'll
when
represent.
it comes to,
I have an engineering degree.
There you go. When it comes to math, though, I could talk to 20 teachers in Utah, and they'd say, here's how you fix the math program in Utah. And honestly, as I've talked to those 20 math teachers, they're all pretty much saying the same thing.
Yeah.
They know, but part of what we do is we bring in that Stanford professor to tell us what our curriculum should be. And what we really should be turning to is those teachers. And we can bring in industry professionals like the engineer. And we can bring in, like when we did this with the financial literacy standards and when we created the financial literacy test, we sat down as a group of teachers. We sat down as, we brought in professionals. The professionals gave us great feedback in terms of, hey, in my industry, this is what we want to see, right? But the boots on the ground, they know what needs to be done. And if you take 20, very skilled math teachers in the state of Utah, and you sit down and you say, hey, let's look at how you would adjust these. They have very strong opinions on what could be done to fix math in Utah.
Yep. My mom teaches math here at Lehigh High School, and there have been a couple of times where she's essentially told me, so I teach it the way that I'm supposed to teach it, and then I teach it the way the kids will get it.
Yeah.
So
same with my friend who's a calculus teacher, a different one.
And here's the thing: I'm not trying to. She's old school.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And these new,
look at me. She's old enough to be my mother.
These
old school.
These new students, and now I say new students, new teachers coming in, just graduate. They've been complete. They're not old school at all.
Right.
Yeah. And so they're trying to teach kids math in a way that they're not learning math.
No, it's subjective. I mean, I don't mean to make fun, but it goes into the, what do you think? What do you notice? What do you think? What do you notice?
And math's in no way subjective.
And they're going, just show me how to run the algorithm. I need to, plug and play. And so I don't think that those questions are not important. I think they're important later on. When you know how to do the thing, then you start to think and notice. But we tend to be, especially with this subjective language, putting the cart before the horse and asking kids things that we haven't given them enough pieces of the puzzle to even realize that they have a puzzle in their hands.
Right.
And so we're constantly asking them through these new models, subjective questions, and they don't have enough foundational knowledge to be inspired or have the inquiry that it's supposed to pique inquiry, right? Like, okay, so what is that? I don't know. What does that mean? But it's not set up so that they have enough of the basic knowledge and so I have, my own students, my own children, hey, does that work for you? And they're just frustrated. They're more frustrated than anything else. And they're grateful when a teacher comes along and says, okay, this is how you do it. Now, what do you think? Now, what do you notice after you know how to do it?
I teach financial literacy, right? And we do some math in there, right? We talk about interest and calculating interest. A concept as simple as changing a percentage to a decimal. Yeah. Kids don't get. Right. They don't know. And when I show them, you just move the decimal 2 places. That's how you change a percentage to a decimal. Right. Yeah. I'm amazed at how many of them are, it's that easy? Yeah, it's that easy, right? And so now, now you can calculate interest. And I do a quick little math lesson, but I'm amazed at how many struggle just to calculate. Yeah. And I'll try to do 5% and 10% because it's easy, right? Rather than 8%. But, just the math skills of our students is severely lacking. And it's because of that.
Okay, so sorry.
No, I just kind of want to bring us back to, so, we're kind of talking about Common Core, but I mean, initially the question is how do we set the standards and how do we help the school districts implement them?
That's what I said. We bring 20 teachers together. We bring 20 teachers together. We take them up to the state office of education
with the highest scores.
Well,
the teachers with the highest scores,
and we say let's create what are the core standards here? Yeah. What's important? Yeah. Okay. What do you want students to know when they leave your math course?
All right.
And it's really that simple. It really is. Instead of asking Obama's administration to put together those standards, and instead of asking the Stanford professor to put together those standards, we have boots on the ground right here in the state of Utah. Could you find 20 English teachers in the state of Utah that can come together with some core standards? It's really that simple.
There's
it really
great
is.
ones.
And then you evaluate it. You have them write a test or something, or?
Yeah, sure. I've used the example of financial literacy, right? The reason why financial literacy is kind of unique is because it's not a national thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's very unique to the state of Utah. So what did the state of Utah do? They brought they brought industry professionals together. They brought teachers who were teaching the subject, and they said, let's create the standards. Let's create a test.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is. And financial literacy in Utah, I think, is doing a phenomenal job. So, and the report we did with Auditor Dougal, it shows, hey, Utah students are starting to figure it out. Now, we've got some cultural issues that we've got to fix that deal with, how we manage our finances, but that's a whole nother issue.
Okay, I want to ask you about that because we talked about the issue with Common Core. One of the issues being subjectivity, which I saw a lot. You can make anything fit the standards.
Right.
And along with the subjectivity, that goes along with what some people would call maybe a culture war that we're in, and more of a postmodernist society. And so as we look at how, that culture influences affecting the schools, because it definitely is. What do you think that the state school board can do when you have this thing so pervasive everywhere?
Mm-hmm. And that's why education shouldn't be a national thing. It should be a local thing, right? And the values being reflected in our education system should reflect the community. Mm-hmm. And certainly I think that these values they're coming from outside in. Mm-hmm. And that's where we have to, as a state, we have to say, no, our focus in education is education, not political activism. Mm-hmm. Right. And when we bring those teachers together, we have to make clear that we're teaching them mathematics. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. We're not teaching them to be activists. And the goal here is to make sure that students, when they leave, when they graduate, when they move through our system, they understand the basics of arithmetic. Yeah. I was an English major. The reason I loved being an English major, I loved that it taught me how to think critically. Yeah. Right. I loved that it taught me how to communicate through writing, and I loved that it taught me how to analyze things and read a text and say, well, what about this? And that's what English should be. People want to harp Shakespeare, right? Well, why is Shakespeare important? Well, because his topics that he addressed make you think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They make you question. They make you go, well, what about this? What about that? And they're a little bit controversial. They were very controversial at that time, right?
Yes.
But you have to kind of analyze and ask questions. And that's where I think we've got to get back to those basics. And I think that we as a society, and when I say society, I'm talking about Utah. I'm talking Utah culture. I'm talking. We've got to say, this is what's important to us. We want our students and get rid of the divisive ideology that's coming into our schools, that it does nothing to advance the actual education of our students.
Yeah. I think of this when I really love looking at educational models, like philosophically, certain different, you've got Montessori school, and I'm a big fan of the Trivium. I have a sister-in-law who has her kids in a school in Georgia, and it's a classics education. And I was telling her the other day that if we have the foundation be what is true, what is good, and what is beautiful, and we look through that, and she goes, oh yeah. And she had her 8-year-olds, and he gave the school motto, and it had that in it. And I thought, okay, so I think sometimes when you aim for those, you can shake off some of the subjectivity. And I often think that subjectivity in brain development is really great for college, after you have a foundation where you can argue those things and you can get into them.
Right.
But we tend to be, in my opinion, giving them to younger brains that have no idea what to do with it.
And then it's easy to fill those brains with what you want to fill them with,
right,
rather than really asking them to analyze it and to be critical of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think people are a little bit fearful of the indoctrination that's taking place, right? And it is happening. Is it happening on a large scale in Utah? I don't think as much, but it is. It continues to creep in that direction, and that's what you're seeing a huge homeschooling movement. Yes. And when I have parents come to me and say, I'm taking my kids out of the public education, I've got a really close friend that I saw his wife post the other day, taking our kids out. And I want to have this conversation with you. I want to know why.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've been a public education teacher. It's amazing to me that my critics and some of my opponents out there say, he's attacking public education. My goodness, I've worked in public education
this is how
for 27
it's
years.
Literally my heart is with public education.
My 5 kids have gone through public education, but I am looking at my grandkids and I'm looking at my own kids, and I'm saying, with the direction, if it continues to go in the direction it's going, but what we've got to recognize, if you're a homeschool parent, I respect that you're doing that, number one. Number two, I think that it's great that you have the resource, the ability to do it. And I respect, and I would never, that's your right as a parent. But I also say to those parents, we cannot give up on public education.
Right.
100%.
Because public education educates the masses, and those are future voters.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, future neighbors.
Correct.
Right? Future leaders.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you may be able to keep your kids out of sort of the, direct fire, I guess, that you're worried about in the schools. But my kids go to charter schools, right? They're still public schools, but they're, a little bit different. But they still play with the kids in the neighborhood, right? And so, it's still out there. They're still exposed to it. Right. Yeah. You may control a little bit more what they're getting and how they're getting it. But the reality is you still have to live in the world that's run by public education.
Right.
And that is the worldview that is given, right?
Yes.
And so if we want, hierarchies to be made of the right things, if we want competency, if we want what is good and true and beautiful, we have to care. Everybody has. Everybody has to care about public education.
Christy, you're a public educator as well as I am, and I. This is something I think you understand well. Is there's a lot of socialist ideology in education. The system is kind of a socialist system, right?
Yes.
But it's funny to me that the free market capitalism, the principles of conservatism, they work.
They do.
Yes. They work. And our country is where it is because of the principles of the free market system, because of capitalism, right? And I all the time, it's interesting because you'll find a teacher that's pushing the ideology here and there, but they won't manage their classroom that way. Right? You manage your classroom you manage your classroom using the principles of a free market system. You you create in your classroom that competition. Right? And it works. And the reason why you choose to do that is because that's how order exists. That's how success happens. And it's funny to me because it's you've probably seen the idea of the college professor who says, "Hey, we're going to apply socialism to your grades," right? And it's like, hey, we're going to take, and then what ends up happening is the first test that they take, some do well, some do poor, but we bring you all to the middle, and you all get the same score because that's how it works, right? And then the
Good
people,
work, you got to be.
the people who excelled are like, why am I working so hard? Right. And
Right.
the people who failed are like, this is awesome. You know, I got a good grade because you brought me up. And ultimately what it does is everybody fails,
Yeah.
you know, in that system. And so, you know, we've got to get back to implementing in our public education system the principles of the free market system.
Do you know where a wealth of knowledge is? In asking the students. I ask students all the time, and they'll tell you who their favorite teachers are. And it's not the easiest ones. It's the ones they learn the most from.
Where you're getting challenged.
Yeah. And I mean, I've heard kids as they're doing the schedule for the next year, seniors telling juniors, oh yeah, no, I know it's going to be your senior, but you have to take that teacher. Yeah, he's really hard, but he's really good. You're going to learn a lot, you know? Yeah. And so when you ask, they want it harder. The problem with so much of this collaboration and moving to the middle is we're losing greatness.
Yeah.
And I'm scared that we're losing greatness both within the system and as a culture, you know, a cultural way to look at it. And we need the great people. We need a path for greatness to rise.
Right.
You know, we want all of them to rise, but at the same time, society is not built like that. We need our people, our biggest contributors, to have a system where they can have the opportunities, you know, to get to academic superiority.
Why do kids play sports? You know, why do kids compete in American Forks band?
Yeah. Oh,
you want to go see how many hours those kids put in? You want to see how hard they work? You want to and
they're incredible.
Why are they so successful? They work hard.
Yeah.
They work as hard as any sports team out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and there are other programs. Our drama department at American Fork is outstanding. Those kids work hard, but that's where they thrive. That's where they want to be, because they're being challenged. Okay. You want to be a part of American Forks band because excellence is what we're asking of you. That's what we're demanding of you.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's not just, you know, how much work you're putting in, but it's because you feel like those teachers or coaches or whoever are investing in you, right?
Right.
It's not just the push, oh, you need to do better. It's, hey, look, you're doing this. Yeah. And when you do this, you could be doing that, right? Yeah. I mean, you're a coach. You understand this. You do this with your kids, right?
Sure.
If you move this way instead of that way, it gives you more leverage in wrestling. You know, I mean, I did swimming. And it was the same thing, right? It's like, look, if you extend your arm further, you're more streamlined, you'll go faster.
Right.
Right. And so it's not just, hey, we have a level of excellence we're trying to achieve, but it's also, I care about your performance. Your performance affects everybody else's outcome. Right. And that's what you learn. But I wanted to go back to something that Christy said, because she mentioned, you know, we're losing greatness and we've got these kids that, you know, that really are going to excel. And for the kids that excel academically, and initially you were saying, hey, well, let's have a baseline and then let's help them, you know, move from where they're at. I mean, do you put every kid on an IEP, or how do you? And
absolutely. In
fact, I just used a 3-letter acronym. Yeah. Okay. So you want to explain what an IEP is, and then answer the question?
Yeah, IEP stands for Individual Education Plan. Right. And so an individual education plan is basically, when you say for every student, well, what students are getting an IEP right now? Okay, well, in the education system right now, if you're a resource kid, if you test as a resource student, they will create an IEP for you.
Yeah, my son had one.
Sure, and so that IEP is very specific to that student in terms of saying, all right, this is what this student struggles with, this is what they're good at, and so we need to make sure that we kind of help them to, you know, move through the system and progress through the system with this individual education plan, an IEP. Right?
One example, he had ADHD. They just gave him a little extra time on the tests.
Sure.
You know, stuff like that.
Yeah. And so there's sometimes accommodations, but there's also, hey, this is what we're going to do to help this student, you know, move forward in a positive way in the system. Right. The answer is yes, every student needs to have an IEP. They really should. There's schools out there that are doing it right now that they don't have a whole bunch of resource kids. They're just they've recognized the importance of it, and these schools are saying every student at our school has an IEP.
So hold on.
Yeah,
Lehigh High School has like 2,000 kids in it.
Sure.
Is this doable?
Yeah. it is doable, 100% doable. Okay.
Okay.
Here's how. Okay. You've heard of homerooms, right? If every teacher has 30 students that they are in charge of those 30 students and their IEPs,
oh, okay,
it's manageable. Right?
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. I've got 30 kids that I coach on the wrestling team. It's actually more than that. Right.
Right.
But guess what I do with those 30 kids? I check their grades. I follow up with their teachers if they're not getting it done in the classroom. Coaches do this. Trust me.
Oh, yes.
You know, and so
I was a high school athlete. My coach did it.
And so, you know, I'm probably focusing more on the student that's struggling with their grades than I am the one that's excelling. Yeah. Right. But it's not impossible to do. It's a matter of breaking it up and just recognizing, hey, this teacher, those 30 students, you are in charge of their IEP, and you've got to manage and make sure that their IEP is being taken care of as they move through the system. So
you're talking about in the principle of having an individual looking at an individual student, a teacher looking at an individual student and saying, this is working, this isn't. You're not talking about broadening the federal program of IEPs, are you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Just to be clear.
No. I mean,
I used a loaded term, but
I mean, the bottom line is does every student at that school have a mentor that's helping that student progress in their education?
Well, and I can just imagine too, like my son, he wants to do video game design, and I you know, realistically, he struggled enough in school to where, you know, going through a traditional program, I just don't know if that's going to work, right? Sure. But, you know, let's say that his secondary interest was welding or something like that, right? So he's not going to go to college. He's going to go, you know, he's going to go learn as a journeyman or something, right? And so the thing I like about this is that for the kids that are going to go to college and want to be doctors or engineers or whatever, right, you can sit down with them and say, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to be an engineer. And so then you say, okay, well, you know, you probably have to take these classes and do these things, and the counselors do some of this, right? And then, once their IEP is tailored to what they want to do, and then the kids that, you know what, I want to be an auto mechanic. All right, well, you know, you need to pass these classes so you can graduate. You need to take these other classes because they're applicable to what you want to do. You know, maybe help them get into some other classes if they're interested in drama or something else for fun. But just have somebody pay attention to not just the, hey, are you going to pass your classes? But pay attention to the, hey, what kind of life do you want to live? And heck, let's set you up for success.
Right. Yeah. I got 30 wrestlers on my team. Okay. I'm just using that number. I got more wrestlers on my team than that. But I'm just using that number because that's where we've been. Right. How many of those kids are going to go on to be professional wrestlers? I'm not talking WWE now, right? Olympic level wrestlers, even college. Okay. I got one. I got one that has the potential to be a college wrestler. Okay. That's legitimately going to get recruited to compete at the college level. Right. I've got, there's underclassmen, there might be one or two others. Okay. But out of 40 plus kids on that team, 3 of them are going to move on to the next level and compete at the college level. Right. I'm not coaching them to be college level wrestlers. Right. I'm coaching them to learn discipline, hard work, and a lot of other things. Right. And that's the beauty of what we do is, and so, the idea that you're talking about is really, you know, I'm not training wrestlers. I'm training people. Right. And I'm trying to teach them ideas and principles that will allow them to then move on into the world and have success in the world. The one that is pretty successful is my son. He's pretty good. Okay. Christy's watched him. And he right now, you know what he's struggling with? I want to make money now. I don't know if I want to go to college. Right. You know, and the good thing, I've kind of raised my kids to be entrepreneurs, and he's an entrepreneur, and he's figured out, Kyle, you can, you know, run your own business, do this, do that, and you can make really good money. And I just want to go make money. Right. You know, Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I've torn with that a little bit because I have taught him, hey, look, some of the connections that you make in college will help escalate that, right? Maybe take it to another level. And so he's seen the value of that. I'm not trying to bag on a college education, but there's different paths kids can take.
Yes.
There are, for sure. I have a question about, there are a lot of NGOs, non-government organizations. There's a lot of public-private partnerships that happen on a state level. There's a lot of, as we talked, new technologies that are being implemented. On a state level, I think that's probably where the majority of the contracts or implementation happens. Is if you've sat through state school board meetings, it's a lot of presentations from organizations that would like to partner,
right,
into the education system. So I had some thoughts as a parent and as a teacher when I saw new a data hub coming. Yep. And so I just wondered where you were on that and what your thoughts were on public education and data collection.
Well, it's this is I was having this conversation just the other day, and it's kind of interesting. We got a hot topic right now about cameras in the classroom, right? Putting cameras in a classroom, and I'm like, some of the same people who are complaining about their privacy being protected are the same ones arguing they want cameras in the classroom.
Interesting.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, wait a second. Do you want privacy, or because I'm all for accountability.
Right.
I'm all for transparency. Right. But you put a camera in a classroom, and you make it accessible to the public.
Right.
What stops the pedophile from watching and identifying potential victims? Right. Yeah. And your privacy has been completely compromised at that point. Yeah. Right. Privacy of our students is very important, and this is like, I understand something, accountability, transparency, 100%. But I want to make sure that we're protecting those students. Okay. We're protecting their data. We're protecting their privacy, and making sure. We live in a community where, you have a conversation with somebody, and the next thing you know, something's popping up on your phone for an advertisement for that. Right.
Yeah.
Never had that.
And yeah. Right. I mean, and so we've got to be very careful that bad people, I'm just going to put it this, are not targeting our students because they have access to data that compromises their privacy. Yeah. So, it 100%, it is something that's happening, and that we've got to really guard against, is making sure that we are protecting our students' information, their data, and making sure that it's not being farmed out to outside institutions.
Yeah, I would be in big favor of having, one, maybe an opt-in program, and two, some sort of separate contract that makes it so that I know that when my student graduates, that data is deleted. Because that's a lot of, we know data is the new gold. And if you have grades, disciplinary action, attendance, what they ate for lunch, whatever, they have the potential to have every single thing kept in there. I want to make sure that that goes nowhere else, which would mean ensuring that there are separate contracts with any of these companies that are doing, that are helping, and they do a service. They offer a service for, a price. They partner with them, but making sure that data goes nowhere else than what it's intended and collected to be used for.
And teenage kids, we were all teenagers once,
right?
And we do stupid things.
Yeah.
As teenage kids, these water games are popular right now.
Yeah.
Right. And the kids will do these water games where you get squirted with a water gun, you're out, your team. Yeah. And at the end, there's a big pot of money, and the winner gets this big pot of money.
My daughter was part of 3 of those at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, my son is in charge of water games at American Fork High School this year, which means he doesn't get to participate, that's the good part of it.
Hallelujah.
But he's the one that organized the water games at AFI. And, And so I'm hearing all these stories, right? And I'm hearing the stories because I've got the campus police officer that will come to me and say, "Hey, can I talk to your son about this or that?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, yeah, talk to him." And you've got kids, and I'm like, "Man, these kids don't think, right?
They don't think.
But they're sneaking into houses at midnight with a toy gun." In black,
right?
Okay, do you not see where?
So somebody's going to find them with a not toy gun.
Yeah.
We have these conversations, in our
right?
house.
You know, and it's like this teenager isn't thinking for a second that there might be a dad in that house that thinks that somebody's breaking into his daughter's bedroom,
right?
Okay, and he's going to come down with a real gun, like you say, and they don't think that way, right? And they just want to get the water gun again. They want to squirt somebody, and so this is, you know, our police officer on campus has kind of said, "Hey, we need to adjust some of these rules. We need to do this." And
Can I look at the bylaws,
it's just this is just dumb, right? But teenage kids, and God, you want them to have the freedom to learn from their mistakes, have some fun, but we're also the adults in the room.
So that's my fear with data. My
fear
is kids that mess up.
Yeah, would that follow that kid, right?
Yes.
If that kid ends up doing something stupid, and is that going to follow that kid for the rest of his life?
Can you imagine, having one of our children sit in a job interview and they pull up some data history and they'll go, "Hey, you had a lot of tardies your junior year. Is that going to be a problem here?"
Yeah.
Or, "Hey, you were in the principals. It looks like you got suspended." Because we all know, and some of them in our own family, kids who really struggled in high school with that kind of stuff and turn their life around and are wonderful, productive members of society. And can you imagine if that stuff haunts you? That's what I'm scared of.
I'm familiar with a kid that sends a text message to a group,
right?
And he was failing a class, and he calls the teacher a stupid, naughty word, right? And then I'm gonna kill her, right? And uses that language, and one of the students in the group, nervous, oh gosh, is this kid really serious? Turns it over to the authorities. It was language, and I don't, the kid, I don't think really intended on harming the teacher,
right?
Okay, but it was turned. Is that going to follow that kid?
I hope not.
Right?
I hope not. I mean,
sometimes is that data that that gets out there? So we've got to make sure that we protect those students, because they are kids and they're going to make mistakes, and that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to help them to learn from those mistakes.
So I want to just add in a couple of things, and then I got to check on the recording. But so for me, it's funny because like having their past follow them around, that's something that I'm concerned about. But we've got AI these days, and you can take all that data about these kids and train an AI on how to manipulate them or how to follow them around, or anything like that. The other thing is that I am not entirely comfortable that these vendors and partners are being audited in how they manage and who they give access to the data in the first place.
Yep.
And so for me, it's not even so much as, is it going to be long enough lived to affect somebody's life, but it's also, who has access to it today, and what uses can you put it to? Because if you train a model on it and then you delete it, you still have the model, right? You can still say, okay, I've got this AI system that now will model some aspect of this person's behavior, and what can you do with that?
Right. And
so, it's a violation of privacy, but it's potentially dangerous in my opinion. And so, these systems, as much as they do for us, I'd really like to see stronger controls on what's there and what's being done.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's an easy issue to have take a strong stance on, is recognizing that data is important and making sure that it is private, making sure that we're not farming it out to outside companies. And that data should exist. If at the State Board of Education, we need to hire experts to come in and to build those systems for the state, great, but it's certainly, but trusting the state's a whole nother thing too,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you say that,
fair.
but it's important for us to make sure that we're protecting that information.
Yeah. So we've been going for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, well,
so I think we
been
probably
great.
ought to be looking at wrapping up. But
I
Cole,
probably got my wife texting me to get home too. So
yeah, it could be. But I'm anybody who's trooped all the way through to the end. If people want to ask you other questions or see what you're about on your website or things like that, where is that stuff?
Yeah, so mrcolekelley.com. It's MrColeKelley. And you can reach out to me through my website. And my phone number's on there, I believe. If it's not, shoot me an email through the website and we can connect. But one of the things that I've really tried to make sure that my campaign is about is being available to the voters and to my constituents. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. And yeah, we have different parts of the, we're Utah County Republican Party leadership. We have some parts of the county that are in your area and some aren't. So you want to just let people know if you live in any of these areas, and that includes areas outside of Utah County. Yeah, there's 15 board members, and those 15 board members do specifically cover a geographic area, but at the same time, we represent all the students of the state of Utah. So while I'm being, it is those constituents that are being voted on that have the vote. I'm happy to answer questions from anybody. But yeah, as I mentioned before, my District 12 covers Vineyard, Orem, Lindon. There's 2 precincts in Pleasant Grove, and then it goes out to Wasatch County, Duschene County, Uintah County, and Daggett County. So those 3 full municipalities in Utah County of Vineyard, Lindon, Pleasant Grove, and then Orem. I guess that's 4, but just the 2 precincts in Pleasant Grove. But yeah, that's the area in Utah County that I cover. All right, good deal. Well, thanks for coming. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming.
Okay, thank you.